I'm back. Alright, I am a little childish. I wish I had ways of expressing it though. Right now, life ain't very fun. And that led me to look at the idea of living for today or living for the future. We have definitely changed a lot in the last 100 and probably 150 years. Just before the Depression, we were in a carefree mode. I won't say everybody, but there was a large group that, spent it as fast as they could make it, a larger group than normal. And then the Depression hit. People were foolish enough to think that something can last forever, when history has never shown that to be true. So I don't know where they got their thought. I know one thing, they didn't get it by paying attention to the past, that's for sure. So then people went into a hoarding mode just to survive. And with the fear of what would happen tomorrow, they never knew. It was that unstable. They were afraid they wouldn't have food, so they wouldn't even eat as much that day because they might not have anything for tomorrow. Sometimes I get into that even today. I don't know where it exactly comes from, but I do have that idea that, well, I'll just save that for tomorrow, Then, kind of in after the war and all, we lived for our children. That's why we went out and we worked hard. I mean, we played hard to some degree, but it was, on a family type setting. And believing that whatever we build up is for our children. And because people in America at that time remembered the Depression, they didn't want their children to have to suffer like they did. So they built up as much as they could. They made sure they could, get by and make their lives easier, and they would turn out to be better people, which was actually a foolish idea. The fact that they didn't suffer, that they didn't work as hard, made them less appreciative of what was going on. Now I sort of fall into that category. I was born in 1957, so it was kind of, I guess, coming to an end. And you might say because we had this boom in technology and stuff, everybody had stuff. Oh, and we were moving from a farming type atmosphere or country into an industrial, and so a lot of people weren't living out in the country. They were living in cities and on the outskirts of the city because a lot of the good paying jobs was in the city. I won't say good jobs. So we didn't always experience where things came from. I was lucky in that area because we lived on a small farm. And the goal became a little more selfish for the parents, and they will say tried to build or create businesses and plan for their retirement, and but with the idea that the children can take the business over. Once we die, we got large insurance plans that they'll get, and they'll get the house we have. And of course, that didn't turn out exactly as planned because, first off, anybody that started a business as an entrepreneur, and handed it off to their family to run, typically it was gone in 3 generations, them being the first one. And that's because they didn't really get trained properly. They didn't realize how hard it was to build the business to start with and the time that it took. They enjoyed more of the fruits of it and just pissed it away. Again, I fit into that category. It was as if I knew things were going wrong, but I didn't know how to turn it around. For example, I had an opportunity to start a business when I was 18 years old, and I didn't really have to put that much investment into it. It took me several years to figure out that it was my business, my responsibility. I couldn't play, as much as I did, and I had to be, I had to have better morals. I had to be more honest. And so I said it was one of the worst things for me to be handed something like that at such a young age. And it wasn't a built business. I had to build it. So there was good in it, there was bad in it. I wouldn't recommend handing something like that, especially when your family didn't teach you anything about it. And that's another thing. The parents were too focused on making themselves successful, and they didn't spend the time with their children. Yet all along, if you look at farming, they keep passing the farms on because those children had to work with their parents every day. It makes a big difference. So you can see that we were losing touch with reality. Another thing that happened is the people living in the city didn't even know where their food came from. It's gotten to that point. They don't understand. You don't understand. You that are listening to me. You don't know what it takes. And there's a lot to it, and no. Just like money doesn't grow on trees, well, food don't just appear in your grocery store. It's got to come from somewhere, just like we start out as babies. As we start out as daddy's little squirt, if you know what I mean. So we spoiled our children, and then our children felt they weren't taken care of properly somehow, and they were going to make it better for their children. So yes, they started out with better jobs, but then what did they do for their children? They just gave them gifts, money, stuff. Stuff was coming faster than you could buy it. Advertising, TV, and all that, entertainment. Everywhere you turned, there was some kind of enjoyment that took you away from reality. So now, you think, well, I'm just going to live for today. Because we don't know how things are going to turn out. And in fact, we look back, look at so-and-so. He worked his whole life, and the day after he retired, he died. That happens a lot. Or they couldn't enjoy their retirement because of health. That happens a lot. A lot. And since we then also lost the ability to see the future, we do things more based on what's good for me today. And so is it worth living for the future? I mean, first off, our children aren't going to appreciate it. The second thing is we don't know how long we're going to live, so why live for the future? Why care about the next generation? Why care that after I die, things are going to be a lot shittier. That's how even our government works today. They make decisions only patching things together, knowing that it's going to fall apart later, but they'll be done with their careers at that time. And it just keeps them, their plans in place, but they don't worry about the next person's. It's not a good way to think when you don't care about anybody but yourself. And yet on the other hand, you did the work, so why can't you have some of the fun? It's a perplexing question. I'm not saying that I have an answer for it either. I wouldn't mind hearing some feedback saying what you think. How do you balance it? What is fair? How much do you, we'll say, teach your children and force upon them, and how much do you let them learn on their own? When do you jump in and help? Help your children, help your neighborhood, help other people. And then when do you step back and say, you know what? You brought it on yourself. You're gonna have to, figure this one out for yourself. I could tell you there's a book that warned about this. It was printed close to 2,000 years ago. Yeah, the Bible actually does talk about us living like this. And of course, even in its time, and then you start looking at history, you can see where, like Rome, or Greece, they developed and grew into huge, countries and had tremendous power, and then collapsed. And so, yeah, I do think one of these days America's going to collapse. That doesn't mean it's the end of the world. However, let's be realistic. Let's be honest. And something I'm pushing now is, let's be individualists. Not even if we say we're an individualist, we don't agree with each other just because of what we say. Just because we claim this type of ability and way of living. Thanks for listening.